Welcome everyone to the Learning Analytics Learning Network session. As some of you may be aware, we created this organization or network, if you will, to be a means to have learning analytics researchers really around the world track what's happening and what's interesting. So quite often there's innovations that you as a researcher or your students or you as a PhD student are interested in pursuing and understanding. And this is just a venue where we try and identify where's interesting work happening and and introducing that individual or their work to the Learning Analytics Learning Network. If you haven't been on the site, Justin can probably drop a URL in while I'm doing my babbling session here. Feel free to have a look. We've got a good number of sites developed or resources developed already. And as we go forward, we'll continue to add resources. So our goal is that it becomes a professional development space for academics, for students, and for others who are sort of newer to the field of learning analytics to get comfortable with it. This is an initiative with colleagues here at UniSA and also here at UTA, where the two organizations with consultation and engagement with Ryan Baker from UPenn, sort of are, for lack of a better word, the central organizations that are promote and do the work around getting this made available. But all of you in the community, either attending these sessions or sharing with us someone that you would like to have speak on future sessions, will help us make sure we develop a suite of talks that are relevant to you and that help advance really everyone's understanding of what learning analytics can practically do in the educational or corporate learning spaces. With that said, I'm really delighted to have an excellent friend and colleague, Abelardo Pardo, join us for this session. I first met Abelardo actually a few moons ago in a very sunny, temperate climate of Banff, Alberta in the middle of winter. And early on, his interest and in helping shape the field of learning analytics has been instrumental in helping to promote and develop the field. Even more impressive, in addition to obviously his academic work, which I'll let you Google on your own time, but he's dean at UniSA in the STEM school, dean of programs, I think if I got the term right. And he's currently also the president of SOLAR, but more significantly than president of SOLAR, he's actually been very actively involved in LASI and in conference presentations and so on. So you're hearing from someone who has been upfront and personal with the development of the field. The current project that he'll be addressing to us today started a successful grant that he won a number of years ago around adaptive feedback, personalized feedback, how to automate those kinds of processes. And that's what he'll be sharing with us today regarding a platform called OnTask and more broadly, some of the components of adaptive and personal feedback. So Abelardo, fantastic to have you here. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join and share your insights with us. Over to you.
All right. Thank you, George. And thank you everyone for taking the time this morning, afternoon, evening, whatever the part of the day you're in, to share with me this talk. While I'm fumbling here the windows and sharing, just to let you know that the type of talk that I have prepared today is not so much on the technical side, but a bit more on the practical one, trying to share with you some, am I sharing?
Yes, I see your screen right now. I am seeing the connecting.
The title?
Yep,
all right.
Connecting data with personalized feedback.
So what I was saying, the talk today is not so much on the technical or research side, it's more on the practical one. And it's basically targeting practitioners out there that we all are aware of the amount of data we have around. And I think we're all struggling connecting the dots a little bit and navigating through the hype and the over promises about, machine learning, artificial intelligence. And at the end of the day, what we want is to improve the learning experience for our students. So how do we connect these things? So this is what I'm going to try to cover here. Just very quickly to let you know a little bit of context. I'm a member of the C3L, the Center for Change and Complexity in Learning, a center at the University of South Australia, led by George Siemens. And we're focusing on a lot of fun stuff, but mainly how humans interact and create knowledge using artificial cognition. We also put a lot of focus on practical applications, and then you will get the sense, not only through this project, but some other projects that are also presented in this set of talks. Since I'm talking to people from all over the world, I always want to take 2 or 3 slides very quickly to let you know where we are and what we do. So this is Australia, and I'm sure you know this place, Sydney. We're not there. This is the first place that comes to everybody's mind. Thanks to the tennis players, you're also familiar with Melbourne, right? We're not there either. That's the second most famous place. We're actually here. and it's a beautiful place next to the sea, and it's only 1,300 kilometers away from Sydney. So in Europe would be like going from Eastern Europe all the way to Spain, sort of something like that. So yeah, that's where we are. It's an interesting place, has these type of things. This is a sunset, and I feel a little bit bad now for the folks in Texas, but hang in there, Justin, it'll be better soon. This is the type of sunset on a regular day. And by the way, this picture was taken by Shane Dawson, and I'm using it without his permission. So just make sure he doesn't find out. He'll probably get mad. All right, let's get into business here. What I'm trying to connect here is, like I said, data with personalized feedback. And I'd like to do that going not from the technology all the way down to the details, but more from the pedagogy, more from the design, more from what is the reason for an instructor or anybody involved in a course design to go through this path. So it's a little bit the other way around where I used to do it. So the first reason is, okay, why do we have to bother connecting data with personalized feedback? To me, there are two compelling reasons. The first one is feedback is definitely, or probably almost unanimously described as one of the most effective ways to improve the learning experience. So to me, that gives me a sense of relief, because I don't know about you, but when I was heavily involved in teaching, it was also very frustrating to find out or to clarify where would be the best way for me to reshape my design, or what kind of aspects should I focus? Should I focus on student participation? Should I focus on assessment? Should I focus? So many things. Feedback to me is a very precise area that has a lot of potential to create positive experiences. Lots of literature out there justifying this. I just picked this one because it was published recently, 2019. The team by Hattie Wisniewski-Zierer published another meta review. It contains a lot of detail. I just took this from the abstract, but bottom line, it's supposed to be having some sort of a medium effect, positive effect on the student learning, which is good news. If you read the entire paper, there are a lot of things to unpack there, and some feedback focusing in certain aspects is better than others. So it's complex, definitely, but at least we're getting this sense that it's a good way to guide us in terms of what we should do. So to me, this is the main reason why we would like to start improving the quality of the student experience based on, let's talk about feedback. Let's talk about how can we use data to shape or change or provide more effectively some sort of feedback. The other question to me that helped me a lot understand how to crack this nut is where exactly do I need to intervene? Where do I put these things? Where do I start changing things? And we always start with the learning design, right? And this is my not very good attempt to try to capture a design. Let's say something happens in week 1, and then we have week 2 to week 6, and students interact with videos and questions. Maybe there are face-to-face sessions there or tutorials. So this is a bit of a generic mock-up of a course that pretty much everyone can relate to. Your course probably is not identical to this one by any stretch of the imagination, but you can translate very quickly. Time, I put it flowing as with this arrow at the bottom from left to right. And we have a discussion forum where students exchange comments and they answer peer questions. At some point, we have an exam at the end or some sort of assessment. Think of any of those elements. So this is a learning design, nothing new. And at some point, I remember focusing on this and trying to see which elements do I need to tweak, which things do I need to change. And then I remember reading this paper, which I think is one of the papers that helped me the most to understand the complexity of what we're trying to pull here. This is a paper published by Peter Goodyear and Lucila Carvalho in 2016. And one of the elements that I remember I was very impressed was that they created this image of the model that's trying to model how learning designs are then delivered and are connected to the outcomes. The main element that I took from here is, as instructors, we put together artifacts, tools, texts, we put together tasks for our students, and some sort of social situation emerges, or we suggest our students to work in teams. But the key element is that all those things are proposals that we put in the learning environment. We propose, we anticipate that things will work certain ways, like setting up some sort of house in there for people to interact. But the reality is that activities emerge in ways that we don't anticipate. And in fact, activities is what we think they will emerge in certain way, but they have a life of their own. And students shape those activities. The students have a lot of elements in that context. The key element of this paper is that they postulate that those activities are the ones that moderate the outcomes. These are the ones that really connect to the outcomes. So in a way, our learning design is an indirect way of affecting the outcomes. The one that is closest is the activity that emerges with these intentions that we put there as learning design. So to me, this was very enlightening because it took away the focus on the learning design and put it a little bit more in the context of the learning design is a proposal, activity emerges. I need to look at these two elements, especially at the activity, because that's the one that moderates or the one that influences the outcomes. So if we bring the two pieces together, observing emergent activity right now, it's a really crucial element because I know it's the one that is mediating the influence of the tasks and the physically situated artifacts and the social structures with outcomes. And if I go back and focus on feedback, then observing this emergent activity will guide me probably to articulate the feedback more effectively. The other thing is that these activities are highly dependent on each student's context. So we thought it would be easy to just say, okay, put your learning design out there and then students will participate and they'll get the outcomes. It's not so simple. Those activities are heavily dependent on context. And this is the case for personalized feedback, right? Not every student has the same reality. We would like to think so, but over and over, we are faced with the true reality, which is every student has a different story. Every student has a different situations. And those of you that have been teaching and talk to students, as soon as you get a little bit more close to their day-to-day activities, you realize that each one of them has a special situation or some special circumstances that shape those activities. So that's the way we're thinking. Feedback is much more effective if it is personalized. And I am totally aware that I'm not rediscovering anything new here. I'm just giving the right foundation to strengthen the argument that focusing on feedback and personalized feedback is actually coherent with the type of models that the theoreticians are proposing. Okay, so that sounds good. But then if we put these two things together, when exactly should I then be focused on the feedback? Now that we agreed that, yeah, the learning design is good to focus on it, but the learning design has to be mediated or has to be influenced by that context, by those emergent activities. So the first approach that I remember doing a few years back was, all right, let's focus on time and just look at the design. And maybe I should do something on week 1. Maybe I should do something in the middle of week 2. And I used to think more from the learning design, purely the learning design perspective. And it is easy to start thinking in these terms because typically an instructor in their head, they have this vision on how the learning design is delivered and how the students traverse that experience. But I think a much more effective way to do that, if we bring in the information about the activity that emerges, is much more thinking, when should I deploy a feedback process? Perhaps when a student has not engaged with any resource, right? That would be a specific context of a specific student that I'd like to probably address through feedback. Or when a student has only engaged with a subset of resources, maybe students are just looking at the videos, or maybe students don't attend lectures, but they look at the videos. And these are specific contexts. These are specific activities that emerge while the delivery of, while the learning design is being delivered. So this is, again, another pivotal element of the approach. It's not so much focusing on the learning design, it's focusing on the activity that emerges as a consequence of the learning design. Now, when I show these to instructors, they begin to think much more in terms of what is happening in real time. And very easily they start thinking, oh, you know what I like to do? I like to focus on those students that have submitted the first assessment and they really had a very, very low score because they may be dismotivated, or maybe they're thinking about dropping the course. So we're beginning to think much more precisely in terms of the context that affect the students and those activities that emerge. And we know that moderate or that articulate those outcomes. Obviously, these type of processes, they still have to be embedded in the delivery. So a second step would be refining that feedback process and say, I like to probably engage with the students in a feedback process with those of them that has not engaged in any of the resources, but at the end of week 1, otherwise it'll be too late. Or if a students engage with only a subset of the resources, maybe halfway through the experience, I'm going to reach out to them and say, hi, have you considered the videos? Have you considered whatever other resources I'm not using? So I guess we have followed this path basically because this is the most effective way of framing this feedback process, and it has an intrinsic component of personalization. And this component derives from the fact that it is the emerging activities, the ones that are influencing those outcomes. So what we're seeing here is, again, nothing new. Everybody probably one way or another is doing this type of thing. If they have enough time and resources, they observe what is happening. They observe all these emerging activities. We know that they influence the outcomes. So we eventually engage with feedback with the students. Maybe we discuss with them. Together with the students, we make a plan or maybe envision some actions, and then we let students or we let whoever we're talking to act on those, and we keep observing. So this is, again, a fairly straightforward and conventional loop. The point that I'm trying to make is that these loops are already there. There's nothing new. Problem comes when we try to personalize this loop, because we understand that this is the way to go. This is the way to make it effective. And we realize that, you know, these blanket announcements about engage with this or suggesting that it's something that doesn't quite work. This personalization, if we agree and we are convinced that it's effective, is definitely feasible. If you have 10 students, you end up knowing all of them, you end up getting close to them, you end up understanding the context that is shaping the emergence of those activities and that mediate the outcomes. The problem is when you have 100 students or 200 or 600 or, you know, one of these massive courses, the MOOCs, then all of a sudden you realize this is not feasible and you say, yep, good idea. Was fun while I had 10 students, no longer feasible. And this is the type of thing that we think the data can help you tackle, still personalize, or at least provide a very good approximation or compromise to personalized feedback. So what do you need in order to start cracking that barrier? What do you need to try to preserve as much of that insight of the context or the activities that are emerging while students traverse your learning design? So the first element is data. Okay, and this is my attempt to say, suppose you have data and suppose you have something very simple that everybody's familiar with one way or another, which is just a spreadsheet. And let's assume that each row in the spreadsheet is a student. And let's assume that the columns in that spreadsheet are just attributes of those students. What I'm showing you here is a synthetic data set that we have created for a tutorial, which I'm going to point you in a second for you to play around with on your own time. So let's assume we have this matrix or this table or this spreadsheet, whatever you want to call it. And this may be different from institution to institution. One common element we are assuming here is that each row corresponds to one student. And the name of the game here is, okay, what kind of information do you have in the columns? So I might have certain information like existing attributes, right? I may have some information about sex or perhaps this cohort of students, which is, let's assume, is very large. And therefore, that's the one that I'm struggling with this personalization. They are coming to this course or this subject from different programs. So I have three types of audience, the ones that come from medicine, another one that comes from chemistry, another one from biology. And maybe I have all of them taking the course. Or maybe I have some emerging attributes. For example, these columns over there. Let's assume this is the result of an exam, just for the sake of this discussion, okay? So these are attributes that are emerging as part of those activities that are extracted when the students traverse that learning design. The reason why I'm putting this example of the exam first is because pretty much every course out there has one way or another some form of assessment. So assessment is the immediate attribute that we recognize and say, oh yeah, my students do something, they get some score, I can put that as a column and have some sort of results in there. This example contains the total final score of the exam. You see there on column W on the right-hand side, and then some individual question scores in the exam. And again, this is just for the sake of illustrating that. Now, this philosophy or this type of approach, we can extend it. So suppose you work in an institution that also provides you in those rows information about the activity in the discussion forum. So for each student and for each week, for example, says week 2, week 3, and week 4, you get information about the number of days that they are online, or in other words, the number of days that they have been visiting the discussion forum, the number of messages they viewed, the number of messages they contributed, and the number of questions that they started. And this is something that it's a very fine-grained type of information, but you see where we're heading. We are getting more and more insight about these emerging activities. So according to this information, I am able to detect the students that ask a lot of questions, the students that answer a lot of questions, but they don't ask questions, students that only view certain posts, or even students that connect to the platform, they don't view any posts and they don't contribute or they don't ask questions. So quite a lot of detailed information about these emerging activities. Remember that model by Goodyear and Carvalho. So then with this information, I do have a very good sense of what is happening, right? So the next question is, all right, who do I select for feedback? Who do I pick on that matrix? How do I work around this? So you start framing things like, all right, let me take a look, for example, at the exam. I'd like to engage primarily, if I look at the exam, maybe with those learners that did not participate in the exam. And look, the matrix there is telling me that information. I have 2 rows that are empty. So one possibility would be, all right, I get insight about that activity. The activity is telling me that certain students didn't engage at all with the exam. They were not present in the exam, or they didn't even answer the questions. So I probably want to detect those students. And again, think about thousands of students you have in your course. Then immediately you need to start framing, all right, I'd like to talk to a subset of students, a sub-cohort, and that sub-cohort would be those learners that in the column total, they have a blank. That's the way I identify those students, right? So if you go to the right-hand side of that figure in column W, if you have those rows that have the total column equal to blank, then those would be the students. How many of them do I have? Well, I don't know. If this is thousands of students, I might have 20, I might have 100. If this is perhaps a MOOC and we have this typical pattern of a lot of engagement at the beginning, not so much engagement at the middle, I may have a lot of them if this exam happens or this test happens or is situated more towards the end of the course. So then I'm beginning to turn the insights, in this case, the participation in the exam, into a selection of these sub-cohort. So this would be one possibility to engage with a subset of students, and I'm beginning to envisage the type of message or the type of communication I would have with them. Let's start exploring this. What would be a second potential cohort that I would do? I would connect with based on the information. So another one, for example, would be those students that, yep, they participated in the exam, but they actually failed all the questions. So that would be another set of specific context or specific situation. I'd like to probably have a different type of chat. And I'm not saying a chat like you give them a phone call to each one of them, but perhaps an email that says, hey, you probably need to start reviewing the material for the exam because, you know, a lot of things happen there and you didn't get any answer. Probably, obviously not in those terms, but you get the gist of it, right? We basically selected another sub-cohort. And this is also very easy to detect. It's basically those that have the column W equal to 0. And you may have 10, 20, 200, 5,000 you selected, and you begin to understand or you begin to unpack a little bit more the situation that led to that result. We can keep playing this game and start thinking, oh, maybe I should probably give some sort of information to those that most of the questions were answered correctly, and think about some sort of feedback that you could give them. In my experience, they are very receptive to challenging questions. So rather than telling them, good job with the exam, you just challenge them with something additional in the course. They are ready to, they seem to be performing very well. They're ready perhaps to deal with the next level of complexity in your course. And again, very easy to identify. I would say, I would like to have some sort of message or start some sort of conversation with those students that the total column is larger or equal to 80. So we are beginning to connect now the data that gives us insight about those emerging activities with some sort of feedback process. If we keep playing this game, let's go now to the discussion forum. Look at those rows that have no forum activity in weeks 2 and 3, for example. So those would be the columns that have 0 in days online 2 and days online 3, which means days online on week 2, days online on week 3. So you would select, again, with a very simple condition, you would say, oh, let's select the learners with days online and days 2 and days online 3 equal to 0. And then you would select those students that for those 2 weeks, there has been no activity in the forum. And you can imagine more or less how would you talk to them, right? Are you aware that discussion forum is there? Why don't you put some questions in there? Why don't you read some of the most important topics in there? Any sort of suggestion or any sort of tips on how to engage with that forum. The key element is the data is giving you insights, and those insights allow you to personalize these messages. So the reason why I'm presenting it this way is because this type of journey starts from very common tasks that most of the instructors are already doing out there, which is designing the learning design, trying to get insight about what is happening, trying to provide feedback to students one way or the other, it's basically stretching this idea or making it a bit more generic, if you will. The other element that we have added here is that we are beginning to assume that somehow magically we get this matrix or this spreadsheet with lots of information about our students. And I know what you're already thinking. Maybe that type of information in your institution or in your context is not so easy to get. And I would tell you that I agree. But at the same time, you may be able to start exploring what kind of elements or what kind of attributes would be good for you to have in those columns in your matrix, so that you start following this type of rationale to tackle or to provide this personalized treatment to the students. Okay, so in this context, so far so good, difficult to disagree, but really, how do we do this? Because this would be great. I remember I was two days ago, I was talking to someone. I was actually sitting in a presentation by someone discussing the need to personalize feedback. And there was somebody that immediately interrupted and said, oh, I couldn't agree more, but we don't have time for this. I mean, we need some technology. We need something to help us. Otherwise, this personalization thing we will never be able to do it. There are way too many students. And my answer to that is like, boy, do I have a tool for you. And this is basically the rationale behind the production or the creation of this tool that we call OnTask. You see there are two URLs and a screen capture. The screen capture is the screen you would see if you connect to this demo server. We have a demo server out there for people to try it out. Doesn't do anything substantial, but it allows you to work with the tool as if you were using it. So remember, we're coming from, let me go back to this, the need to somehow look at data, try to connect those insights, and then try to articulate how do we personalize feedback. So this tool, OnTask, whenever you connect for the first time, is going to assume that you are managing workflows. And to make it simple, a workflow is nothing more than a subject or a course, whatever you want to call it, or a unit, like some universities here in Australia call it. Biology 1011. So that would be one example, right? And it's a course on cell biology. So you will handle or you will manage certain workflows. And the first thing you do, you select a workflow. And a workflow contains, surprise, a table. And this is the equivalent of the spreadsheet. And this table is there for you to start managing. Now, let me take a pause here and give you a little bit more information about, wait a minute, how did that table get in there? And there are different ways to get to this point. One is you manually update something, and you could actually update directly the Excel sheet. In fact, there are some menus there that allow you to do things like upload your own Excel, or you can upload your CSV, or perhaps more ideally, you would have your institution pre-populating this table for you. So in the ideal world, and you have to be mindful here that different institutions have different approaches to this type of problem. Some of them, they have some sort of processes that are perfectly integrated into the day-to-day operations. And whenever an instructor connects to the LMS, there is a link. I'll show you an example. There is a link that says go to OnTask. And when you connect to OnTask, the first thing you see for that course is this table. And in some other institutions, you need to do a little bit of manual work. And that's why we have this menu here that allows you to do certain connections. Now, the other element, and you will forgive me for those that are not techies in the audience, but another alternative, and the tool is very, the architecture was created specifically for that purpose, is if we want this table to appear here magically, it needs to be some process in the background that uploads this table. And for that reason, the tool has what we call an API. And this API is precisely the type of element in an architecture that allows data to enter through the back door, so to speak. So you don't have a human typing that data for you one by one. What you have is an automatic process that has enough intelligence to say, oh, I know that I have 25 instructors handling all these courses. I know where my data is, typically a data lake or some sort of similar data storing facility. And there is an agent, which is a program basically, that through the back door will populate those tables for you. And this is the type of discussion I typically have with the IT support departments in universities, where that question pops up 5 minutes down the presentation, saying, hang on, how do you get the data up there? All right, there is an API. That API is authenticated and allows you to populate these tables. But let's go back to the real world. This is the table. This is the element that the instructor is going to look at. And what we are assuming is this instructor is going to do exactly the same that we discussed 5 minutes ago, which is, all right, let me look at what is going on here. Let me look at these columns. Let's see what are they telling me. So the tool, you see a button there that says column statistics. It allows you to do some basic visualization, box plots, histograms, because this is typically what instructors want to get a sense of. Oh, look, there seems to be a median of 70 and quartiles of 60 and 75, Q1 and Q3 respectively. I may get a little bit of a chat with certain students with that score. The histogram below says that I have a few students. Well, in this case, it's one because it's a small sample that we are using just for the demo and for the tutorial. But I may start thinking, yeah, I need to talk to those students that had a score between 0 and 20. So this is our way of facilitating instructors, just gaining insights on the data that is appearing. So again, you manage this table, you look around, and at some point you would like to start creating some actions. And these are the actions that you are offered. Lots of types of actions in there, but the bottom line is you can craft a personalized email. This is the one that I'm gonna cover very quickly. You can also do things like providing feedback for a rubric. Rubric is a fantastic element for assessment, but it's also fantastic for feedback because you have a matrix of aspects of the assessment you're considering and level of attainment. For each level of attainment of each aspect, you can craft a feedback message. And then depending on the level of attainment that the student obtained, you provide certain feedback. So it's another very good example of gaining insight and then personalizing. The platform also allows you to send reports, could be to you, it could be some other unit in your university, but these are more like secondary functionalities. The main one perhaps is this personalized email that I'm going to describe. It also contains basic functionality for a survey, but let's focus on the type of thing that we would do with personalized email. So the action you see at the bottom there that says suggestion about the forum, it's a message to remind those students having visited the forum to do so. So it's basically now articulating the action based on the insights we gain. Some students do not actually engage with the forum. And after looking through the matrix, we realized that the condition that would express that in my context is I like to talk to those students for which the days online is less or equal to 7. And I know it's not directly connected with forum posts, but I'd like to emphasize to the students that they need to review or they need to go back to the forum. Now, the other element that some people, when they look at this slide, they come back and say, hang on, days online is not number of posts, days online is not number of answers. So why are you putting that condition there? And the answer for that is it depends on the context. If you are the instructor, you need to see exactly what is the condition that better suits your strategy or your intent. And in this case is, yeah, if the days online is less or equal to 7, suppose this is happening and I have the intention to do this like really halfway through the course. So it's been already, I don't know, 3-4 weeks that we've been connected to that. If the number of days online is less than 7, I'm going to remind these students that there is a discussion forum and they should participate regularly. So don't think too much in terms of a strict condition. It's more like the type of condition that will suit your purpose of reaching out to those students. So you use this condition to select a subset of students, and you basically craft then a template, an email template that will have some placeholders that will be populated. So dear given name, which will be replaced by the right name. This is just a reminder to let you know that the activities in the course will rely on the discussion appearing in the forum. See if you can take a look at the messages currently there and let us know if you need any additional information from us. So there is quite a lot of time that I can spend talking about what are good ideas and bad ideas to write this text, but it contains some sort of action suggestion. It contains gentle mentioning of facts. This is a reminder to let you know, rather than we have checked the matrix and you haven't logged in 7 days, which is very counterproductive. So this is the template you write, and then the tool obviously allows you to preview what is going to happen. So this would be one of them, dear Tane, and then fills up all the gaps. And Tane is one of the students that satisfy that condition. Now, suppose that instead of writing one email to that subset, you would like to write an email, but that email have different paragraphs depending on which students. You know, in other words, that email template gets much more sophisticated. It's not only tackling one sub-cohort, you are sending these to all your students, but you would like certain parts to appear and certain others to disappear. So the tool allows you to do that as well. It allows you to first defined conditions. So whoever got topic number one, a high score or a low score or a mid score, whoever got a high, mid, or low score in topic number two. So this is basically separating students depending on the way they perform in different topics. And then the kicker is here when you combine all of them and you know that the exam has multiple topics and you write 3 potential paragraphs per topic in this template. This template is a bit more complex, as you can see. So if we're talking about chemistry and molecules of life, I have a text for the ones that have a low score, a text for the ones that have a mid score, and a text for the ones that have a high score. The ones for the high score, as you can see, not a lot to say, good work with this topic, but we replicate that for all the topics. So this is something that the tool allows you to do, create these conditions and then write an email template that is a bit more complex because it's not only just putting the name there, it's actually selecting or removing paragraphs depending on the values. And this is the preview for this student called Phoebe. She did very well in chemistry and molecules of life, therefore good work with this topic. Not so well on cell function and structure, and therefore the paragraph there is different. Not so well in cell division. So as you can see, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 topics, and we provide 1 sentence for each one of them. At the bottom, you say your total score for the midterm is 60. Kind regards, Sarah Jones, course coordinator. And at the bottom, you have the values that prompted the selection of that text. So this would be a clear articulation of how to use those insights and create or craft this template to then provide the feedback. Let me go quickly through another example, the one that I mentioned before about the rubric. This is typically how a rubric looks like, right? You have a criteria, certain criteria for assessment, and then you have certain levels of attainment. In this example, we have high, medium, and poor. Nothing really earth-shattering here. And typically, rubrics provide a description of what is expected for the different levels of attainment. So the tool actually brings that rubric and say, all right, if you have that rubric, why don't you provide feedback for each one of those levels of attainment? And from there, we can see, we'll provide the feedback to, depending on your level of attainment for the presentation. So as soon as you write that, for all the criteria, then automatically you can craft this personalized email where we go criteria by criteria. In this case, Phoebe had a presentation, good job. You included spec blocks, problem description, methodology, results, and conclusion, and it was delivered clearly and in the allotted time. Good feedback. And structure, good work. The sections have the right content and are coherently written. And this type of email will be different for each student depending on the level of attainment or the combination of levels of attainment in the rubric. And if you have lots of aspects of lots of criteria in the rubric, then the number of combinations is actually very high.
Oh, yeah.
Right. I need someone to mute the microphone, otherwise we're all of us entering your living room. Excellent. What can you do with this? Prepare the action to execute and send the emails. And you can do several things like sending a summary or tracking the email reading, which is not perfect. Various things. You can also schedule these emails. Maybe you want to run these things every week or every night or twice a week, something like that, because the students don't necessarily all follow the same pattern at all times. So as soon as someone submits an assessment, oh, that night you pick that up, your data is updated, and then your action executes, and there is some specific email with a rubric, for example, that reaches the student. This is very useful when you have continuous enrollment in courses rather than cohorts. All right, what else can we do? And this is getting into a little bit more on the techie stuff. What we have been exploring in our labs is embedding the use of predictive models in here. And I'll just skim through the idea. It's fairly simple. You basically have this table on the left, which is the table we saw. You take the data from there, you let the statisticians and the programmers and all these techies build those predictive models for you, because they typically are fairly complex and they need to have a lot of parameters and a lot of black magic goes in there. And then once they have the models, there are a few things that can be done to integrate it with the table. Maybe they identify learner clusters, and those learner clusters go back to the table. And this is an example that we published a couple of years ago, where we detected different strategies of the students with when they engage with resources. And a clustering algorithm separated those groups for us, and they were labeled A, B, C, and D. And Group A engaged with all of the resources, Group B only with the videos, Group C, videos and assessment, and Group D, nothing whatsoever. So that was a good insight from the clustering algorithm, pre-selected certain populations. As soon as those labels are in one of our columns, then very quickly we can put an email that says, hello, Phoebe, or hello, John, and craft some email that is coherent with the type of cluster that they were identified. We can also have more like a numeric or explicit outcome predictor, like, for example, the final score or the score of an assessment or some sort of prediction here, or maybe dropout prediction. And again, we put it on a column in that table and opens the possibility for the instructor to say, all right, the model has just created those predictions. Remember that these are predictions, not reality. And we have to modulate also carefully how do we address the students based on that insight. Or we just simply make those models available to the instructors for them to look at it and understand a little bit better what is happening, and then perhaps influence some other actions. So this is more on the sophisticated end. You would need support for, as an instructor, you would need support from statisticians, data managers, data scientists in order to create these models, make sure that they make sense, make sure you understand them, because you need to work with them as part of your process to create these interventions or these actions. All right, just to give you an idea of the type of things we've done in the past, working in this context, specifically around getting insights from these data tables and then predicting the effect of feedback. We published quite a few of our findings recently. This is just publications in the last 2-3 years with lots of people, most of them in the audience, spread all over the world, to be honest. So it's quite like a team effort in here. But it also gives you a sense that it's an interesting area. It's an area that tackles an interesting problem. And in my view, and this is my personal view, I insist, it is a very good way of connecting this dry data thing with the day-to-day operations of deploying a successful learning experience for the students. I mentioned at the beginning that one of the key elements is integrating this properly with the day-to-day operations in a university. And this screen capture here is an example of how the tool is integrated in the online delivery of courses at the University of South Australia. Every course coordinator, when they go to their UniSA online page, this is a Moodle LMS, and in the top tab of the navigation, you have welcome menu, and at the bottom of that, once you expand it, you have a direct link to on task, and it brings you directly to the table. So the instructor would click on task, look at the table. That table would be empty at the beginning or only pre-populated with basic information about the students. It will grow as the course goes by with certain regular updates, and you have to be aware of what are those updates, how often do they happen, and this is something that depends from institution to institution. And then each course coordinator has the possibility of articulating these insights and running these actions for feedback. So that's an example. All right, almost there to conclude. Let me just give you a quick sense of how can you play around with this tool. If you go to that URL that I put there at the beginning, demo2.ontasklearning.org, you will see that login page. If any of you is interested on playing with that demo site, just send me an email and I can open an account for you. Fairly straightforward. The demo does not send any email outside. So that's why we have the demo site. You can play around with it. You can create the actions. You can do pretty much all the functionality, except there is no email going out, no communication, nothing, but allows you to play out with the rules and do those type of things. In the top right corner, you'll see the manual there. Once you click in the manual has a fairly comprehensive section with a tutorial. And this tutorial contains a fake or the synthetic data set that I show you with the columns that I show you. So you can follow those steps in your own time. It takes a while to follow through, but you get to explore a little bit a substantial number of elements of the tool, and for you to get a sense of what it's able to do. Okay, I think I'm gonna leave it here. Just the conclusions. In my view, instructors implement those designs, instructors create those learning experiences, but it is the activity that emerges during this delivery that moderates the outcomes. We need to be very mindful of that. We always design something that has an intention, but that intention may or may not work with the students. Using that activity insight is crucial if we want to support feedback processes, because whenever you start unpacking the effectiveness of feedback, personalization comes immediately to the front of mind, especially once we come to terms with the fact that it's this emergent activity that is moderating the outcomes. Scaling this personalized feedback for a large number of students is challenging and is tricky. And if you want to do it manual, it just won't be possible. So it requires first the possibility of handling data, the possibility of accessing data with more or less detail depending on your institution, but then start identifying subcohorts with activity conditions. That's the way to start unpacking that complex context that is moderating that activity when it connects to outcomes. Then you can use that data or those insights to start framing what we call conversation starters. Reach out to students, hey, can we help you with this task? Or can we, do you have any issues using the forum? These type of things. Or do you think you can resubmit your assessment to improve your score? Each course is different. Each course requires the expert in the middle in the equation, the instructor that typically knows what is happening, when it's happening, and is much more familiar with the context. On Task is basically a tool that does one simple thing, which is allows this instructor to manage these workflows. By workflows, remember, what we mean is a table and a set of actions. And those table and actions, some of them you may recycle them from course to course. Some others, they'll need to be specifically designed for that course. Hopefully, I gave you a little bit of the insight of the type of area that we've been exploring. And as you saw, we had several research studies and production instances out there. So this is a tool that has been used in quite a lot of institutions now. And we have been trying to collect through the open source project suggestions and especially functionality improvements. And we've been advancing that product quite a bit. The project finished about a year ago. So we are now in these interesting times where we're looking for people to keep pushing the project and keep advancing it. And again, just to conclude, let you know that the demo server is there, it's available, it has a tutorial. So there are all the bits and pieces and elements for you to start playing with it. So I'm gonna leave it here and stop sharing the screen and then get down with the questions, if there are any.
Great, thanks. Thanks very much, Abelardo, for a very sort of comprehensive and detailed overview, both of what the actual data management process is behind the scenes. And I think particularly the way that you structured the logic of it, like how do you move from data that you can get from a simple CSV file down to operationalize something that addresses the feedback question. And I think what you did nicely with the way you started off was situated it within a sort of a theoretical or a evidence base, and then backfilled it with looking at the specific data and determining how you're going to manage to do the feedback. So I've asked if anybody has questions, feel free to ask either via text or raise your hand, and you can ask a question verbally. But while we're waiting to see if anyone does have questions, I'm going to direct it your way, Abelardo, and just get a sense. So you've been working on this now for half a decade or 5-6 years that you've been thinking about this adaptive feedback approach. When you start to look forward, as in what you may do next or what other researchers might be able to do next with this kind of an approach, what does that look like for you? Like, what do you expect might be promising or fruitful area of ongoing work?
I think there's quite a lot of space to explore embedding artificial intelligence here. And what I mean by that, and I have to be careful because we are now in times where over promising is the norm. What I'm thinking about is the more complex these data sets come back with detailed structure, the more opportunities we have for algorithms to start identifying specific conditions and start crafting, for example, a specific conversation with the students, or chatbots that are able to maintain some sort of dialogue that identify exactly their needs a bit more effectively, or even crafting on the fly a specific sequence of resources and timing that are beneficial to the students. So this is a huge area. The other one that might be also worth exploring is we still need the expert in the middle. We still need the instructor. For instructors to start moving to the next level and start articulating what I call it campaigns or personalized training or coaching sequences, where all of a sudden you start handling large number of students, but not through a single intervention or a single suggestion, but more through certain paths or sequence of actions that are appropriate for the student. So it's more like a much more sophisticated tutoring or much more sophisticated coaching with the support of artificial intelligence. So the analogy that comes to mind is in medicine, when the doctors have a lot of support now from technology and algorithms to gain insight and to gain much more information and many more details about what is happening. So in a similar way, that's what I'm envisioning the next 5 to 10 years.
All right, great. So there's a question from Joshua. Joshua asks, you can imagine that if you target a couple of sub-cohorts and conditions, that some students may fall into more than one sub-cohort. Can the systems group these various email communications together, or would students just receive more than one communication? Or do you, I guess another approach would be you may just decide that you treat it as one primary cohort, even though, or one primary cluster, even though they may exist in more than one?
It's a good question, Joshua. And this is something that would be specific for each experience. So the two possible scenarios is, I am an instructor, I detected sub-cohorts, they are disjoint. I describe these cohorts in a way that makes them disjoint, and therefore no students will receive two elements or two messages. A different approach would be, let me focus on the description of the cohort. And in that case, there might be a student that falls in more than one cohort. In the second scenario, the tool is just following your lead, so to speak, that a student would receive more than one email. In the first scenario, if by construction, the instructor guarantees that these sub-cohorts are completely disjoint, then students will receive one email. The tool doesn't go that far as to start detecting, you have students that are in more than one cohort, therefore we'll summarize the email into a single one. It doesn't go that far. But it's something that instructors can think about it carefully and see if it is worth for these students to receive perhaps a couple of communications, or on the other hand, you want to really make them disjoint and give priority to one over the other. There is another question that usually follows up this one, which is, aren't you worried that students would receive too many emails if this tool is used massively? But typically what we have seen is that instructors in a course use this tool at most. The really heavy users is once a week. So it's one communication with the students a week. If the students are participating in 4 courses, I think 4 emails a week, I would say it's not such an intense communication, especially if you assume that a student taking 4 courses is the equivalent of a full-time student. So being full-time at university and receiving 4 emails a week from each of your courses, I think is manageable. And some other instructors, they localize the intervention at a certain critical points in the design, which is the usual pattern we have seen. And again, even if a student is taking 4 courses, the communication is not that overwhelming. Okay, I have Isabella Van Seville from UniSA that says she's writing an on-task email now, and my students love it. I'm glad to see that.
All right, well, I'm not seeing additional questions, so I'm just going to pause for a second.
Yeah, there's one more.
There's
one more from Mohammed Khalil. Let me read it.
Oh, there it is. At least you're paying attention.
That's a good one. Very good question, Mohammed. And this is an issue we have found also in our experience with the tool. There may be instructors that do not have good technical skills. There are a few things that let's assume that there is some sort of support team or teaching and learning support. There are a few things that can be put in place. For example, we have seen very successful sessions where an academic designer or academic developer sits with an academic and starts having a conversation about what kind of situations you detect in your course that you think that students are not engaging, what kind of situations you think you should intervene and talk to your students. So they start identifying like the pain points in the design. After that first initial question, then the academic developer starts unpacking, okay, what kind of things would you like to tell your students? Would you tell the same to all the students, or would you differentiate different type of students? What is your insight? What is your intuition? So through conversations with academics, we typically, or with instructors, we typically reach down the point where they are able to identify, oh yeah, these 3 or 4 times during my course, I'd like to identify these various groups and tell them something. And then what happens is this academic developer can work with the academic to design those patterns, those emails. And then it's fairly straightforward to put it on task. So the reason why I think your question is very pertinent is because it's not so much technologically how to do this, it's much more conceptually to understand what is the purpose of the tool and what kind of help or what kind of support can be provided to an instructor that doesn't have the technical skills to use it directly. Yeah.
Hi, Abelardo, do you mind if I just ask another sort of extended question from that? So I'm thinking of the students' progression across their entire degree, and I'm just wondering how institutions are using these kind of functions to actually get that sort of higher level perspective on student performance. So for those people who are managing their overall sort of performance across a degree course, how they're using the data or managing it.
Yeah, this is actually a very good question. This was one scenario that appeared in the middle of the project that we didn't anticipate it. We were focusing more on interventions inside a course. And there was one institution that was part of the consortium, UNSW, that identified precisely this pattern, which is what happens if we take a much more holistic view, 3-4 years of a program. And the type of data that they were collecting was performance in the courses, but also a specific tracking about the acquisition of certain skills. So let me give you an example. Suppose that this is a program in which students have to acquire fairly advanced level of teamwork, right? And you identify courses that have assessment based on teamwork, and you are able to even separate in between level of attainment. So you have a course in first or second year where students are to be familiar with teamwork, then something else in second or third year where they are proficient, and fourth year, by the time they're about to graduate, they are mastering that skill. So then what that institution did is, using those indicators, they were providing students with feedback towards the end of the semester based on their performance. So we've seen that teamwork, you covered that in this course. We recommend that you now, I don't know, expand on this, or maybe during the summer, take a look at the seminar, or get ready for the next course in which these things will be unpacked a little bit more, and detecting those type of anomalies. Another initiative that also we put in motion here at UniSA was to look at academic integrity issues, which also span across the whole program, and try to follow up with the students and detect those that get very close to academic integrity breaches in first year, and then follow up with them in second year. Just make sure that you remember how to do proper citations, how to be careful about. So you have to take a bit of a look outside of the course, look more at the program outcomes rather than the course outcomes. And again, with those program outcomes, you need to follow the same process. Get the indicators, get the data, and then identify those portions in the time where you're going to address the students with suggestions. And those suggestions are typically much more at the program level as well, not so much about the course. Mm-hmm. So different contexts, exactly the same pattern.
Right, that's great, thank you.
There is another comment from Stuart McKinney that is worth probably going back. Yes, OnTask is open source. It is actually available in GitHub. It is free for an institution to use it. The license for the project, this was a project that was subsidized by the Australian government, and one of the conditions of the grant was to make sure all the resources were freely available with the reasonable licenses. And the software of that application that I showed you here, which you can check in the website, it's all with libraries and elements that are either BSD license or MIT license. So it's a very generous license that allows you to do pretty much whatever you want with it.
All right, well, that brings us to the sort of the top of the hour here. So I just want to again say thanks very much, Abelardo, for taking the time to share your insight and wisdom with us, and certainly some of the exciting work that you've been doing. So for the rest of you, thanks very much for joining us in the session. It will be put on the Learning Analytics Learning Network website, as we have with previous sessions as well. And we have a few upcoming resources happening as well, or future presentations. So be sure to either join the site that Justin shared earlier in terms of the link, and we'll keep doing these events. Usually we try to do about once a month, one every 6 weeks or so. So we do have more coming up. Thanks all. Abelardo, again, huge appreciation. Thank you.